Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm with Lydia Cummins of Ramey Wine Cellars in Sonoma County, California. Welcome, Lydia. Tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're located.
Hi, Allison. So nice to be here with you today. We're located in Healdsburg, California, in the heart of the Russian River Valley. Our winery is in downtown Healdsburg, and we have a vineyard property on West Side Road.
How large is your vineyard?
It's 70 acres with 35 acres planted to Chardonnay and 10 acres planted to Pinot Noir.
And are you doing exclusively estate fruit or also purchasing fruit?
No, we purchased from many wonderful growers. We do have our estate wines, but we have long-standing relationships with growers like Larry Hyde and Kent Ritchie. And it's been a long-term relationship that we've had, and they do a wonderful job, and we feel very lucky to be receiving their fruit.
A lot of big names in the wine industry there. Where can we find your wines? Are they available across the United States and beyond, or certain markets?
They are. They're located in all 50 states and widely available internationally, too, in several countries.
Well, I know that you're the associate winemaker at Ramey, and I want to just get started a little bit about you. What is your first memory relevant to wine?
Gosh, I can't even remember my first memory with wine because it's always been a part of my life. My dad grew up in Europe, and so wine was just a part of our everyday life. With every meal, I started drinking wine, just a tiny bit of wine diluted with water, as is kind of traditional. And it wasn't expensive wine, but wine was present with every meal. So we could be having a chicken breast and some steamed broccoli, but there was always wine on the table.
Do you remember what your first or most memorable wine you ever drank was and what the occasion was?
Yes. So it's funny. I kind of have two memories. Mm-hmm. One is a really sentimental memory. My grandfather had this amazing bottle of Madeira, and I think I was 10 years old, and it was over 100 years old. And I don't remember the producer because I was so young, but I remember being able to taste this wine that was 130 years old, and it was still so vibrant and delicious. And my parents and my grandparents were just reveling in this amazing wine. And so you kind of experienced that as well as a child. But it was really memorable, and I knew that wine was very special. Mm-hmm. My second memory is kind of related to my professional life. So when I first started with Ramey Wine Cellars in 2008, David loves to take us out and order nice wine because he wants us to experience beautiful wines so that we can have a palate for great wine. So my first year working with him, he ordered a bucket list wine. We were at Celadon in Napa Valley, and he ordered 2008 DRC Echezot, and it was just a beautiful experience and so memorable.
Wow. I don't know if I could pick DRC over Madeira, but both experiences pretty extraordinary. I'm jealous. So you said your father's European and you grew up drinking wine. And have you spent a lot of time traveling around the world and tasting wine?
So I've spent some time traveling, but wine was never a focus in my travels. When I did an internship in South Africa, and I've done a bit of traveling, but to be honest, that's really on my bucket list to do some more wine-focused travels and visit some really amazing vineyards and have that connection. But I have young children, so I've had the opportunity to do a lot of traveling in the last few years.
Yeah. Fair enough. Other priorities.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of winemakers collect wine, sometimes for aging and sometimes just because they have a lot of friends in the industry. Do you have a large wine cellar? And if so, what do you find? What would we find in there if we walked in with you?
Yes. So I have kind of a small cellar. I have a 2-tier cellar. So I have my really fine wines that I keep in my little refrigerator. And then I have the little closet under my stairs, the little Harry Potter closet that houses some of my other wines. But I have a lot of amazing wines from Ramey. We have a really generous allocation. And so it's such a pleasure to be able to age those wines and revisit them. And then a lot of friends, I trade and purchase wines from friends. And then there are some wines that I'm a big fan of Bottle Barn, and sometimes I'll find, some treasure and store it away for revisiting.
Do you find yourself drinking mostly domestic wines or international wines?
It's a combination. I do drink a lot of domestic wines.
You're surrounded by it.
Yes, exactly. They're all over, and they're such wonderful wines. So it's so, I feel so lucky to be in the environment where I am, where I have access to all of these amazing wines. But I've learned this from David Ramey. To be a great winemaker, you need to try the great benchmarks. And so I feel so lucky because every month we do a blind tasting and we have a different theme. And so sometimes it's Bordeaux from 2015, and sometimes it's Italian whites, just kind of random vintages. And sometimes they're targeted toward varietals that we're making specifically, but sometimes they're completely different wines just to kind of calibrate our palates and understand what is out there and what the focus is and what we're trying to make.
So with the wines, the grapes that you're working with, as well as some of the other wines you've tasted, do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
Well, that's a tough question. I don't think there's a perfect variety because variety is tied to a site. It's tied to a vintage, the expression of the vintage. And I kind of think the imperfections are where the beauty lies, just like in people. Like anybody that's too perfect, it's kind of off-putting. And I think the same with wine. The little struggles that you have in the cellar, those, when you overcome them and you have this beautiful wine in the end, that's where the real magic is.
So, speaking of perfection, what's your opinion on wine critics and scores?
So,
I know it always has a pause.
Yeah, well, and because I think it is kind of a divisive question, but I think critics are really important. And I just think back to when I was a novice wine drinker, and there are so many wines out there. And so sometimes having an endorsement from a critic is very reassuring, especially when you're about to invest a lot of money for a special occasion bottle. Having that score just sort of gives you the reassurance that it is a good decision, that you're making a good financial investment. On the other hand, I think it's really important to be brave and trust your own palate. And so I think there's a transition period where you find a critic that you really align with, and then you utilize that to make decisions and try different things and kind of go on your own path. But really, whatever speaks to you, that's the right decision, not a score from a critic.
So what speaks to you? Red, white, or rosé?
Oh, gosh. I love them all. And I'm sure this is a very common answer, but it really depends on where I am and what I'm eating. So I love rosé and reds and whites. I make them all, and they're just...
So in all of the above.
Yeah, I know. I love wine.
Still or sparkling?
I don't like.
What about still or sparkling wine?
I do love bubbles, but I think still wine, it it just transcends. It's classic. Bubbles are fun, and I don't think there's anyone who doesn't love bubbles, but I think still wine is my passion.
So because you drink so many different styles of wine, red, white, and rosé, how do you approach food and wine pairing? Do you feel that there are some hard and fast rules where white wine goes with fish, red wine with meat, or do you take a different approach?
Well, we're so lucky. We have a wonderful chef, Chef Paul, who works at our winery. And so we have so many amazing lunches. And at the winery, we really showcase our wines with sort of classic pairings. So our Ritchie Vineyard Chardonnay, we would show with seared scallops, and our Pedregal Vineyard Cabernet, we would showcase with short ribs in a amazing glaze, demi-glace. And so I feel like those classic pairings really do showcase the wines in the most beautiful way. That said, I love going to restaurants where they have interesting pairing menus, and I love when chefs and when they get a little playful and pair wines in unusual and unpredictable ways. I think that's really fun and can liven your palate. And but I think the classics, there's something that it works, and so for that reason, I think that's probably the side I would.
You follow the rules a little bit more than not. So I know you said you have small kids at home. So one of the things you probably want to avoid the most is a hangover, which is a risk we have when we work in the wine business and get to drink a lot. So do you have any special cures or tricks that you do night before, morning of?
Well, the night after I drink a lot. I'd probably drink a lot of mineral water. The next morning, a good strong cup of coffee from the Flying Goat in Healdsburg. That always does. A couple of Advil, maybe a yoga class if I can be so indulgent. But yeah.
So you were talking earlier about how you and David strive to make wines that speak of a place. And so I'm wondering, what do you think that a non-drinker loses out on by not tasting your wines?
I think wine can really enhance a meal. It can make something that sort of what I was speaking about before, a chicken breast and steamed broccoli, it can make it a special moment. And so I think enjoying wine with food and enjoying wine, it enhances your life, and life is short. So we all want more of that.
So if space aliens were to land on your property, yes. Don't roll your eyes. It's not that hard, I promise. No, if space aliens were to land on your property and you wanted to present them with one of your wines, what wine would that be?
Do these space aliens love cheese? I hope so.
Sure.
Okay. Well, our Rogers Creek Syrah is the most perfect pairing with a cheese plate. And so, and to me, it's just the perfect ending to any meal. So I would probably invite them to sit down with a 2005 Rogers Creek Syrah and a really beautiful plate of local cheeses, and we would go to town.
So we talk about how every vintage can tell a different story. Do you think that that is true, that each vintage is unique unto itself, or do you see more things that repeat themselves from year after year?
I think there are patterns from vintage to vintage, but I do think that each vintage is really its own expression. And so it's really important to go in utilizing all of your experience from previous vintages, but don't get hung up on what happened in the past, and look forward and react to what's happening in real time.
Are there any signs that you look for that will kind of predict what a harvest is going to be?
I do think there are definite signs. You feel kind of a shift in the air. You can feel that autumn is coming. The nights are a little cooler. The mornings are a little colder. I'm out vineyard sampling early in the morning, and sometimes I'm amazed how cold it is. Naked ladies start to spring up, these beautiful lilies, these beautiful purple lilies. We have a liquid amber that's right outside of our winery, and you start to see little hints of red in the liquid amber trees. So I think there are little signs all around us, and I get so excited. It's kind of like when you're about to have a baby and you know that it's coming. And it's very much the same about harvest. You start cleaning the winery, you're nesting, you're doing all of those things, and you know it's imminent, and you're just waiting for the moment that it's going to happen.
So do you, when that moment comes, do you guys at the winery have any good luck rituals that you do to start harvest?
Well, when the first grapes come in, we do David does a little blessing. We all get together and we talk about how we're going to have a wonderful vintage, and we open up a bottle. So it's typically Russian River Chardonnay that's our first fruit in. So we open a bottle of Russian River Chardonnay and we christen the grapes, and we all share a glass and toast to a wonderful vintage.
It's a nice way to start a harvest. So there's a lot of producers who will be known to talk to their wines when they're in the barrels, or maybe they talk when they're in the vineyards. Have you been known to talk to your grapes, whether they're still on the vine or in the cellar? And if so, what do you say to them?
Well, that's a great question. And I do talk a lot. When I'm out sampling vineyards, I do find myself kind of talking out loud and maybe not directly to the grapes, but I'm just sometimes so amazed at how delicious a berry will taste, or how close we are. And sometimes it's just a squeal of excitement because something's tasting so great. I don't necessarily, I wouldn't say I talk to the barrels, but I do try to embrace them with love. And when I am in the cellar, I try to make sure that there is a positive, loving spirit that I'm sending out to the wine.
So when you were a little girl, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh gosh. I think I probably most wanted to be a doctor or a veterinarian or somebody that would help. I always had this feeling that I wanted to care for other people. So
you found yourself caring for grapes instead.
Yes.
How did you end up in the path of making wine?
So medicine was an interest. I was a chemistry major, and I did an internship in a surgical ICU and found it very emotionally draining and difficult. And I realized very quickly that was not a good career path for me. So I kind of had this moment where I wasn't really sure, and I traveled to Spain and I was tasting a lot of wine there, and then I thought, oh my gosh, wine is applied chemistry. And so when I returned to the States, I looked into Fresno and UC Davis and started on my path toward winemaking.
Yeah. And when you're not working, how do you spend your free time?
Well, as I said, I have young children, so I spend a lot of time reading children's books and going to the Sonoma County Children's Museum and all of those fun things. But I also really love yoga. I love indoor cycling. I love spending time with friends and laughing.
And on those rare occasions, hopefully they're not too rare, that you get a romantic evening with your partner, what would you drink for a romantic evening?
Oh, gosh. We would probably start with a sparkling wine, just to kind of be a little festive. And then my husband, Chris, loves a good piece of steak. So we'd probably order Cabernet or sometimes like a good hearty Pinot Noir, because I love fish. So that's just a nice, can kind of go both ways.
Yeah. A nice compromise.
Yeah.
What was the best piece of advice you ever received?
Oh gosh. probably to take chances. I think sometimes we are so scared to put ourselves out there and to have that feeling of failure. And I think that's something that I've learned even in winemaking. If you're not pushing yourself, if you're not taking chances, then you can't really, these great rewards won't come. So, putting yourself out there and not being afraid to fail. And if you fail, you learn something. And so that's probably the most valuable advice.
Very good advice. And if you could offer some additional advice to our listeners today, anything you could suggest to them?
What, like in terms of wine drinking?
Yeah.
And I guess my advice would be to be adventurous and try new things. But also, I think it's wonderful to revisit the classics. I've had such amazing experiences tasting wines that I sort of fell in love with at a younger age and then coming back to them. And there's this sense of nostalgia that you get. And it's really a wonderful way, in the same way that you would reread a book that you read at a young age and read it again, or listen to a beautiful song that you loved. And it's really amazing how when you change as a person, how your experience with something so classic can change too.
Yeah, you probably taste it in a different way and see it from a different angle.
Exactly.
What would you say your proudest achievement in your work is to date?
When I first started my career, I worked with Pinot Noir. I worked with William Sellium and Costa Brown. And so Pinot was an amazing passion. Then I started working with David Ramey. He makes amazing Chardonnay and Bordeaux and Syrah wines. And so we've had the opportunity to develop a Pinot Noir program. And that's been so exciting to be able to pull this experience that I've had and the love of Pinot Noir, where I really started with my career. So I think that's been probably my proudest achievement, is that we've developed an amazing Pinot Noir program at Ramey Wine Cellars. And I was part of the beginning, and I'm very proud of where we are today and where we're headed.
Well, congratulations, because I actually, being familiar with Ramey Wines, did not know you guys made Pinot. So that's news to me today, too, and I can't wait to try it. Complete the sentence for me. A table without wine is like?
A library without books.
Aw, that's a good answer. So a VIP person from any walk of life is sitting in a restaurant, and the paparazzi shoot a photograph of that person through the window. And in the background is a bottle of your wine sitting on the table. Who would you want that person to be?
Oh, George Clooney.
With that, there's no hesitation. So we spoke earlier, and you were saying how you feel like you looking at vintages, you've just got a blip on the screen. You're 11 years and you don't feel that you have this long history, but there's a long history of wine, thousands of years. Where do you think we'll be in a couple hundred years or a couple thousand years? Do you think we'll still be drinking wine?
Oh, absolutely. Wine is amazing because it evolves. It's a living organism, and it really challenges you intellectually. So absolutely, I think we'll definitely be drinking wine. It's here to stay.
What would 3 wines be that you would take with you to a deserted island?
Oh, gosh. I would probably take our Rogers Creek Syrah and definitely a bottle of Pinot Noir, a Russian River Pinot, and something kind of bright and lively, like maybe our 2018 Kerner.
Ooh, Kerner. Yum. And going back to what we said at the beginning, when you said that you have a bucket list of places that you want to go, what's at the top of your bucket list?
Burgundy. I would love to spend a couple of weeks just exploring Burgundy.
Me too. I want to go with you.
That would be great.
So just before we finish, there's a little game that we play. It's a game or just a correlation. You know, a lot of times there's a tie-in between music and wine. People either listen to music when they drink wine or it makes them think of something. So just some of the wines that we've spoken about today, if you could kind of tell me what kind of music it makes you think of, a specific song or a genre of music.
Okay.
But let's start with that Kerner that you were talking about.
Oh, Kerner. Something just joyful like Louis Armstrong, What a Wonderful World.
And the 2015 Syrah.
Something a little more sultry, like Billie Holiday. Anything by Billie Holiday.
Russian River Pinot Noir.
I would say something very classic, like Strawberry Fields Forever, like a beautiful Beatles song that's timeless and classic.
And let's end with a classic Chardonnay. As we have sitting here, the Ritchie Vineyard 2015 Chardonnay, Russian River Valley.
I would probably go with a very elegant, again, timeless piece of classical music, you know, something just beautiful and elegant and timeless.
All your music choices exude elegance and beauty like the wines. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And before we go, if you can just remind people where they can find the wines, can they come and visit you, and how can they find you online?
Absolutely. We're at RameyWineCellars.com. And all of our wines are available. Our Sidebar brand is at sidebar.com. And we're in Healdsburg. We're open 6 days a week for tasting by appointment. And we would love to have any of your listeners come and visit us and try the wines. It's a beautiful tasting experience.
You're in downtown Healdsburg?
We are. We're right on Healdsburg Avenue.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, Lydia, thank you so much for joining us today at Wine Soundtrack, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.